Allie Cluff returns. We didn't even know this was going to be a two-parter. It just we got to the end of the last episode. And we were both out of time, and you had too
I
many
just
dang
talked too
interesting
much.
things. No, you just were too interesting to be able to like. I'm like, we should probably go ahead and do this again. Quick recap: if somebody didn't listen to the first episode, so you are basically a small-town kid from upstate New York that did Harvard for grad school, moved to DC, and the first episode was really all about basically political conservatives and conservation, and that is actually a thing. One more before we kind of shift into some of your writing for EV Magazine and go a little bit down the rabbit hole of red pill insanity. If you don't know what that is, you're obviously not on Twitter. But on the conservation thing, I don't know. You tell me if this is something anybody's talking about. The whole food system thing where now we have to like ship beef in from Brazil and stuff like that takes a lot of fuel. And I look back at when things weren't so regulated, and like my great uncle ran a general store kind of pre and post World War II. His wife ran it while he was, off fighting in Germany and France. And there you could actually come in and you could like trade eggs on credit for like a pair of Levi's. You could raise a
That's
cow,
so cool.
butcher it, and sell the meat locally. And everything was wrapped in paper, so there was no plastic. There was no like oil, products being used whatsoever. And if you try to do any of that now, to where if you're a farmer and you're like, hey, I'm going to go ahead and sell this cow to the public without having to go through another company and a whole bunch of regulation and stuff, you're going to go to jail. I mean, there are places that will fine you for buying raw milk. And what's crazy to me,
the raw milk thing is insane.
Yeah, it of all the things we're not regulating, like I just saw in San Francisco that they're threatening to sue grocery stores that close down. Have you seen this? So grocery stores are closing down because they're getting robbed so much, right?
Because obviously, you can't operate.
And so because they're like, well, we don't have any money left because people steal all of our things and we can't pay our own bills. And San Francisco is threatening to sue any grocery store that closed without giving 6 months notice. And like I grew up in small business. My parents owned retail growing up. And I'm like, when you're out of money, you're out of money.
What are you supposed to do?
That's
awful. No, I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, so they're talking about it right now. It is just another piece of insanity that's going on out there. But it's so crazy to me that like you can rob a grocery store blind in San Francisco, and like even if they have surveillance footage of you, the police won't go and do anything about it. If you come to the Midwest and you buy raw milk or you get bought buying food directly from a farmer, that is a situation where both parties could be heavily fined and or jailed and or lose property.
It's completely insane. Certainly in where I've been living for the past couple of years in Washington, D.C., there's been so many, especially CVS's. It's kind of like the corner stores that end up getting hit the hardest. And it's hard because I see a lot of people defending it and going, oh, like they're trying to feed their family. When you see what these people are stealing, I mean, they're just like cleaning out shelves. It has nothing to do with food. A lot of times it's just to resell on the street, and they'll put up like a Venmo link on whatever their thing is. It's just resale. It's straight up theft. I don't really know how people are like justifying that.
I've been.
It's not like a Les Mis. You're stealing bread to feed your kid. I would understand that honestly a lot more.
Oh my gosh! So they're stealing. That's just hard for me to get my head around. They're stealing and then opening their own retail
soap
store.
And household items.
So the people that are
and they have like a kind of like a folding table up outside. Oh my god! It's heinous. I don't understand, but they won't prosecute anything. I think if it's under $600. So unless you're stealing from an Apple store, like it's pretty easy to walk out with the stuff. I'm not a crime policy expert or anything, but I mean, I'm just saying what I've seen on the ground. It's wild.
Well, so let me run that back. The people who are buying stolen dish soap, why don't they just go steal dish soap? Not that I'm encouraging additional theft, but like I wouldn't.
One-stop shopping, I guess. That's a good point. I don't know. Honestly, probably the actual reason is because the dish soap is gone. I mean, you walk into CVS and half the time the shelves are just empty. It's really sad.
Oh my gosh. That is one of those things that just cuts back against working class and lower class people so bad, is that basically the people who are pushing these policies are the ones that basically are sort of like you went to the most elite university for grad school. You went to Harvard. And then, you got a tech job. And obviously you're not like this, but a lot of people who went through something like that have a lot of opinions on, things that have already kind of gone out of style, like defund the police. And who is never about defunding the police is people who are in high crime neighborhoods. Like if you look at the research, they were never for it. Last mayoral election here in St. Louis, the candidate in the primary that was the most law and order got the most votes in the lowest income areas. And it was the obnoxious.
That tends to be how it goes.
It was. Well, it was the obnoxious white people with the sign in their yard that says, like, science is real, water is
in this
life.
house we believe. Yeah.
And those people are the ones that are like, well, no, we shouldn't prosecute any theft. We shouldn't prosecute violent crime. And then we wind up with a bunch of murderers on the street because of it. And the people that live in the good neighborhoods wind up getting like private security, or they just get more police presence. And so they don't ever really deal with the effects of their choices. And so I don't know how we got there from the food thing. But it's crazy to me, like how illegal it is. They definitely do not want you feeding yourself, if at all possible. Like chickens are illegal in my own town. I was planning, I have wanted to just go get them anyway, just because I don't like the mayor. And I think it would be a good moment of nonviolent resistance. I mean, what are you going to say?
I don't know. Have you met chickens? Sometimes they're kind of violent.
Yeah, they are. No, they are kind of violent. But I do think it would be interesting to see if there'd be any real pushback or not. Because you're going to arrest me. What are you going to do?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay. So anyway, that's not something people are talking about in the conservative movement at all, though. Like just deregulating all that. And no.
I think there's a lot of conversation about it. The problem is that a lot of the culture war issues get more of the heat. I think a lot of environmental policy, because it's not very culture war heavy. Like, I mean, when we think about agricultural policy and land use policy, things like that, it just ends up pretty quiet, unfortunately. There was huge legislation today that was passed as far as recreational lands. You're probably not going to hear that on the like standard culture war podcast, but it was awesome. It was sponsored by Bruce Westerman. So we are making progress. And to your point about backyard chickens and whatnot, I certainly think groups like ACC are very big on pushing like very common sense and like wonky solutions. I don't necessarily know if they've done anything specifically on backyard chickens, but certainly just kind of lowering those barriers for the average American to be able to feed themselves and not have to be navigating government red tape left and right. It's just that, the real solutions for most policy problems are pretty boring. And they tend to involve things like permitting reform and really, really unsexy topics that typically don't sell very well.
Yeah, what was and then we'll get off this and we'll actually move into kind of the other topic for today. But what was the legislation? This is super interesting.
I wish I had briefed myself on that beforehand. I can look it up if that's helpful. The Explore Act passed in the House, and it's primarily focused on outdoor recreation and public lands. So hopefully the Senate will get it across the finish line. But yeah.
People have no idea.
And I mean, again, that's like what we were talking about last episode about just getting people outside and recognizing that touching grass is probably healthy for everybody. But I'm going to bet that none of the leading like spicy talking heads, as much as I love them, are probably talking about the Explore Act. But
yeah, well, it doesn't. I mean, I guess to kind of, defend them, it doesn't really get clicks because you can't yell about it, and if you're not raising people's cortisol level, then like that's kind of the name of the game in that. Same thing, even in like sports.
It absolutely is.
You can't be on TV and do like nuanced takes. For the most part, you can do it on podcast.
I think is. You can. I think that's the best argument for just like talking to people in person, though. I mean, I think that honestly, when you think about it, a lot of liberals and conservatives really do agree on most of the common sense solutions to things like climate change and most of our environmental struggles. They don't want to tell you that because online, which is where people are increasingly spending a lot of their time, people just want to yell at each other and, really point out the places that we disagree. But we agree on most of the normal things. I don't think that anyone that I know would be upset that we're getting people outdoors and in their public parks more. It's really just online that a lot of these disagreements come to a head.
Well, RFK Jr., who's running for president, interesting guy. I have no idea if he can pull like any kind of kind of 90s third party vote type of situation. Who was it who was the guy that ran against Clinton and Bush? Ross Perot. Ross Perot got like 20% of the vote. You were not born, but just trust me on this.
I was going to say, I think that's before my time. But,
so I don't know if RFK Jr.
I have heard that name.
Do anything.
I did take U.S. history.
Okay. Well, I don't know if RFK Jr. is going to do anything, but what I can tell you is he was universally respected for running for president for cleaning up the Hudson River in New York.
Yeah.
He was the guy that like unpollutioned it. He sued a whole bunch of companies. I don't know anybody in the political spectrum that's really against that, except for the companies that like can't.
Nobody's against it.
Dump sludge into the river. So that's one of those things that everybody agrees on, but because we agree on it, we just don't get coverage on it, which is kind of a bummer.
Yeah. Well, because you don't get extra coverage from somebody pushing back on you and you push back on them. It's like we were talking about rock climbing last time, right? Like sometimes climbing in the more crunched areas is easier because you have something to like push yourself up against from. You don't necessarily want to be on something flat. And I think politics is very much the same way.
Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and shift here because you're not just in the political kind of conservation space. You actually write for EV Magazine. If people aren't familiar with that, again, you're probably not on Twitter if you're unfamiliar with it. But it's a new-ish magazine that sort of pushed back against a lot of the women's magazine, kind of weirdness that came about over the last like 20 years. And so it's kind of much more about like classic values and beauty and that type of thing. You and I have both pushed back pretty hard against the red pill movement. And when people don't know what that is, I say, first of all, it's just a failed IQ test if you're into that sort of thing. But how would you describe what that is and like, kind of where it came from, just kind of in your words?
I think the main critique that I get when I say anything about the red pill movement is, well, it's just a reaction to feminism. And I'm like, I completely agree with you. I think that kind of third wave, fourth wave, fifth wave, we're talking about feminism is primarily, it's a critical theory at its core. It sees men as oppressors. It sees women's experience in the world primarily as defined through these quote unquote power structures. I'm pulling out all the social justice stuff right now. It sees men as like the primary issue in women's liberation, right? What are you being liberated from? You're being liberated from the patriarchy, smash the patriarchy, etc. Red pill is the rejection to that. It's the, hey, us dudes are sick of this. Women are actually the problem to everything. The problem with both of these is that they're two sides to the same coin. They're both saying that all of our problems in life are the opposite sex. And that's, fundamentally just not true. I think you kind of mentioned Evie a bit. I think the reason that I really like Evie is that it's not meant to be a reaction to anything. It's kind of just supposed to stand on its own 2 feet and say, listen, like women want articles about sundresses and lip gloss, and they don't have to be reacting to anything. We don't have to be like this based trad pill, etc. Like we can just create a beautiful alternative. I don't know. I've certainly gotten women's magazines growing up and whatnot, and they've gone seriously downhill. I mean, if you look at the average issue of Cosmo these days, it's more than likely going to have an article about how to cheat on your boyfriend, why it was great that I cheated on my boyfriend, why I'm smashing the patriarchy by cheating on my husband, like whatever, those, think piece articles. And I don't think that we necessarily just need to exist in opposition to something. A lot of women are just looking for somewhere else to go, and they're looking for other content to read that isn't, constantly shooting back at something like that. They just want that actual third way out of the narrative. But so long answer for red pill is basically the reaction to feminism.
And there is almost like a sort of 3-sided war, I guess, kind of if you've ever seen the memes about like the Mexican standoff where it's 3 people each pointing a gun at the other 2 people. Like each one of them has a gun in each hand. And the 3 camps, I guess, here would be feminism and then the red pill thing. And the best way I can describe red pill is that there was a book that came out that kind of generated a lot of press in, I don't know, the like 2008-ish. I can't think of the guy's name, but it was the first like big like pickup artist book. Like, I mean, you would have been, again, you said you're in like elementary school when 9/11 happened, so you would have been too young for this as a Gen Zer. Neil Strauss. Let me see if I can actually just find the name of the book. Neil Strauss, yeah. So it was all about like basically being a pickup artist for one night stands. The game, penetrating the secret society of pickup artists. This was the
Yes.
very
Okay. I
early
have
days.
heard that. I've seen that referenced.
Okay. So very early days of podcasting, I was kind of like a year one Joe Rogan listener because I was an UFC fan. And this is where you actually had to like plug a device that wasn't a phone into a computer and get the audio onto the device and then plug it in with your wired headphones, kids. It's like they had a wire on them, just
like a ham radio.
And so this really blew up, and I would say that this is 15-ish years ago. This is where the whole red pill thing came from, and the whole book was investigating these guys that was sort of like on the early kind of trend of like men's coaching, where guys would pay to figure out how to have one night stands, which I've never done, but I assume it is just go to crappy bar and find the woman with the lowest self-esteem that has zero self-worth, and then get herpes, like repeat. Like I don't think that's a game you want to play, but it it doesn't seem like something you probably need to like be paying for. But that does seem to be the origin of the red pill movement, and then it's just really escalated from there. Like you've got big podcasts like Fresh and Fit, where one of the hosts this week kind of went viral for saying, well, if I found out my dad cheated on my mom, I'd say he was a G or something like that. I'm like, just you're retarded.
Yeah, I saw that. That was horrible.
Yeah. And I know people say you're not supposed to use that word. And what I mean by that is it's quite possible you have an IQ below 84.
Yeah.
It's in the DSM. That's what it's called. And it's just like, how did we get there so fast? Other than, how do you think we got there so fast? Like from this not existing ever to like this opinion that's never been around before. Like, hey, I wish my core family would have been split apart and my parents would have divorced. Because I want to own feminism that bad.
Yeah, a lot of people have just kind of had this normalization of families being completely fractured, which I definitely think is part of it. I also think that there's a lot in our modern culture that teaches us to objectify one another, and then these movements just kind of reinforce that or give you, good arguments for saying that. I think feminism likes to objectify men, certainly third wave feminism. I know a lot of people will talk about like reclaiming original feminism. I don't even know where I stand on that. I think there's some great arguments for like that super early version of it. That's obviously not what we're talking about. We're talking about modern feminism. And so I just like to clarify that before anyone points me out on that. But I think that I think a lot of feminists said, look, we're sick of being objectified by men. We're sick of being catcalled. We're sick of being treated like we're just an object. We can't fix that. Let's just objectify men right back, right? Let's be high value women. Let's try and see how much money we can suck out of a man on a date. Let's see if he'll take us shopping before the date. You see this trend of women like posting how expensive the dates that they went on were. And it clearly has nothing to do with whether or not they liked the guy. They probably are not planning on seeing him again. And then you have the pickup artist sort of reaction to that of going, okay, if I'm an object, you're an object. I think a lot of this is also fueled by social media. I'm relatively new to Twitter, so this is kind of a new space for me. But one of the things that I've noticed more than Instagram, more than Facebook, more than, LinkedIn, certainly, is that there are so many people without faces. It's so easy to forget that there's a person that you're talking to on the other side. I have to catch myself sometimes when I'm, having a back and forth with somebody. I'm like, oh geez, like this is a person. They're not somebody to dunk on. They're not just somebody to like, be cruel to. And I think dating apps are very much a form of that. Sure, there's a face, but when you're flipping through 300, 500, 1,000 people, how likely is it that you actually are seeing the other person as a person and not just as an object? And I think that's to your point about the Fresh and Fit podcast. If all you're seeing is the other sex on an individual level, very objectified, and on sort of a cultural level as this, problem to be solved, as this, structure to be rebelled against. The men call it the longhouse, the women call it the patriarchy. We all have this like secret theory that the other sex is secretly controlling the world, and that once we conquer them, it's going to be okay. How? I have no idea. I think it's very easy to just want the other sex to suffer completely, regardless of what that does for your family, regardless of what it does to your poor mother. And it's, I don't know, it's just objectification on a very large scale.
So as a fellow Twitter user and journalist, as somebody who's around this, how do you describe the third leg of the stupid stool, which is the trad movement? Like just
the
for
trad movement.
normies. Yes, for normies. What is that?
Yeah, so I think this is kind of contentious because people use it somewhat just as a descriptor. And so, for the purposes of this conversation, I would not say that someone who is living with traditional values is part of the quote unquote trad movement. If you would like to call yourself traditional, go for it. Awesome. I have no problem with that. I wrote an article a bit ago that had very positive and very negative feedback saying, is the trad movement dead? I kind of believe that it is. I think that it was a little bit of a trend, certainly with some of the like COVID era homesteading stuff. I would say that the trad movement is yet another reaction, except rather than being a reaction just to feminism, it's kind of a reaction to modernism. And it's, you'll see it them right, like, okay, we need to return, and they will kind of close their eyes, pick a spot in the timeline of history and go, okay, we need to return to the 1950s. And that's when everything was okay. And that's when all of the gender relations were perfectly balanced and everyone had beautiful families and women cooked their husbands a beautiful meal in heels and a dress when they came home from work. Other trads are like super into like Roman Catholic aesthetics, specifically like medieval era type stuff. I think aesthetically, a lot of it's really beautiful. I think a lot of this is kind of a reaction to the fact that modern aesthetics are kind of drained of that beauty, and we're kind of like post beauty in the super modern era. And I think they're a reaction to the fact that we've lost the plot on, okay, what can gender relations look like? And so they kind of just want to teleport back like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures to some spot when it was okay again. I genuinely would say that broadly, trads have identified the correct problem and not the correct solution. I won't hate on them fully or anything. I think they're correct that we have lost something. I just think that they're wrong that we can just, cosplay our way back into it.
Yeah. There's a lot going on there. The first thing is that the trad movement kind of got started with influencers that exclusively dressed like it was the 1950s. And I'm like,
Yeah.
How is that different than like a 7-year-old who will only wear a Pikachu like pajama every day to leave the house? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of the same
definitely.
thing. Like, you're both just wearing a costume.
It is. And I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't want to touch on trans issues or anything, but a lot of the same people who are like, you're not a woman because you dress like one, are kind of trying to dress like they're in a different century or something, which I find odd. I also, at the same time, I'm sympathetic to it. Like, I get it. I think there is sort of that childish thing in us that's like, okay, if we could just isolate ourselves from all this awfulness out there, certainly as women, I think women are very, very prone to this sort of isolation. I don't even necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it's somewhat good that we look at grossness and we kind of instinctively, if we find it revolting, we recoil from it. I don't think that playing dress up is the solution to that, but I do get where it comes from.
Well, if you are essentially like it's fairly similar to sorry, I'm going to spoil a 20-year-old movie, but there was a really good movie from M. Night Shyamalan, like 2002-ish, called The Village. Have you ever seen this?
Sorry.
Do you care if I spoil a 20-year-old?
No, go for it. Go for it.
Okay, so the movie looks like it's set in like the 1600s in the United States, and this village is cut off because there are monsters all around the woods there, right? And then they get to this moral situation where this girl who's blind begs to go to town, and she says that she believes the monsters won't kill her because she's blind and they'll have pity for her. Because there was a guy that had an accident, and if they don't get a certain kind of medicine, he's going to die. He's got 72 hours, right? And so you see this young woman who's blind, like kind of going through the woods, just expecting to probably be killed to save the life of this innocent man. And then eventually she hits a wall and climbs over it, and there's a highway there. And she runs into a park ranger, and you find out right then that the village, the colony that these people live in, is not this isn't 400 years ago. It's people who fled the city because they'd experienced a tragedy, a family member got murdered or something like that, and they're like, we're going to go be Amish We're going to be the most Amish of the Amish. We're going to take our money and make it to where planes can't even fly over here. So we're going to pretend like it's a different century, right? And that's how we're going to avoid like tragedy in the world. And it was a really interesting movie that now you aren't going to watch if you haven't seen it. Sorry. But the whole trad thing feels like the same thing. It's, well, if we can just get away from everything. And I'm like, I just don't think you can do that without buying a private island and never talking to anybody again.
Yeah, I think one of the ways that I see this reflected a lot is in the discussions, especially around women's modesty, is this idea that, okay, like, you know, as Christians, we're meant to be dressing modestly, which I obviously completely agree with. I would probably disagree and say that I don't think long skirts stopped existing. I also really wouldn't say that pants are immodest, but you know, some will disagree with me on that, I'm sure. As a proud pants wearer, I don't know, maybe I'm not allowed in the colony, but I don't know. I mean, I went to college in sort of an Amish area in Pennsylvania, and someone once explained that when a lot of Amish communities started, they were kind of just distilling a single outfit from their time. And so that it wasn't an outfit that was meant to look like a throwback in the time that they were started. Similarly, I think that a lot of the modesty conversation is kind of immodest because you're looking like something that doesn't fit in on purpose. You want to stand out. I think modesty, properly understood, probably should look like fitting in. It probably should be clothes that you could get at the average Walmart or, you know, wherever you buy clothes. I don't know these days, Amazon. I truly just reject the idea that you can't be modest in whatever era you're living in. There's a common Christian saying that I think is often misinterpreted, but like, you should live in the world, even if you're not of the world. And I think that's a really good interpretation of some of this, you know, we're just going to pretend like we're doing throwback stuff, which is, I don't know, outside of clothing, to the point about the M. Night Shyamalan movie, a lot of the homesteading stuff is like, okay, we have even interpreted it as far as our food and the way that we live, and you know,
well, and the people that are the quote unquote influencers on that are just, they have no idea how farming actually works, because they would put out these influencers will put out these posts and they're like, well, you know, step one, build an Amazon dropshipping business, pay me $5,000 to learn how to do it. By the way, that does not work. People, stop buying that crap. You're not going to make your side fortune on Amazon dropshipping. The network's saturated. Moving on. You know, and they're like,
just one secret hack.
Yes, automate Amazon and make $1 million a year. I guarantee you.
No one's thought of this before.
Not that that's not possible, but people already did it. The market's saturated. You're too late. Go figure something else out. And then they're like, well, you know, move to the countryside and buy this 100-year-old farmhouse in Ohio. And then, you know, homeschool your kids, sleep in till 10 a.m. and, you know, farm. And I'm like, you just said buy a dairy cow and sleep in till 10 a.m.
Yeah.
Those get milked every 12 hours for the rest of your life. And what's funny is this idealized version of homesteading that a few of the influencers were doing on a trust fund. You know, farming with money is really easy. Farming with money is really easy because you're like, well, cows died. Oh, well, you know, the trust fund can buy me more cows, right? Farming for money is very difficult. And, you know, it looks nothing, even if you're actually living the life that these like kind of trad influencers are ascribing. Like one of my good friends from childhood and business partners on a potential project, real estate project, he took last week off from the business he owns to rebuild fence because his sheep and goats were getting into the neighbor's corn. And it's that really that old saying of like good fences make good neighbors. Neighbors are kind of more okay if your sheep and goats get out like after the harvest, because they're not stealing your money by eating your crops. When they start getting out in the spring and destroying your corn crop, like they're a little more upset, right? And my friend Jonathan, you know, owns a business, lives in the countryside, homeschools this kid, you know, butchers their own meat and have a lot of their own food. And his life looks nothing like any of these like trad influencers, despite the fact that they hit the same bullet points. He's not on Twitter. He's not much of a social media guy. But I'm
probably
pretty sure
isn't. He probably doesn't have time to.
He doesn't have time. Yes. And I'm sure if I introduced him to like what this looks like, he would be like, these are the stupidest city people I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. You mean he doesn't wear like a flowy white dress and barefoot? That's the funniest thing is I'm like, certainly growing up around farms, I'm like, why are you barefoot?
Yeah, it's like, actual
Why is
farmers
there
wear
no
steel.
barbed wire? That should.
Yeah, you wear steel-toed boots and denim and Carhartt. Like that's what you actually work in.
You're mostly covered in poop.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. And it depends on
they don't really cover the amount of like the sheer amount of poop that there is in a lot of those videos. I wonder if it wouldn't sell as well or something. But yeah, I mean, and I've heard reactions to this that I think are well founded of like, okay, no influencer is ever going to be real and social media isn't real. And I'm like, fine. Totally get that. However, I think that this is all like this idea that we didn't get to where we are sometimes for good reasons. I think that this, I don't know, we weren't just like perfectly happy subsistence farming. And then someone had the bright idea, like, boom, modernism happened and we all just decided to stop subsistence farming. It didn't work as well economically as other things that we came up with, like trade, or like, what if we traded and then we had a central unit of currency and we used that currency to represent how much we had traded, and boom, we have modern agriculture. Paraphrasing obviously or skipping a couple centuries, but I think this idea that everyone was perfectly happy and then somehow everyone decided to stop doing what they were doing is a very, very childish way of viewing the world in general.
Yeah.
Even with gender dynamics, like there are reasons that feminism happened. I'm not saying feminism is the answer. I'm not saying it was a correct reaction or that it's brought us good things. But we cannot completely ignore the fact that no, things were not all hunky-dory. There's a reason women were really upset, both because of the Industrial Revolution, also because of a lot of the ways that husbands were treating their wives. There's a reason prohibition happened. For example, women were getting beaten by alcoholics. Like, I'm not saying that prohibition was a correct move, but it happened for a reason. And same with a lot of the subsistence farming stuff. We didn't just stop because we, magically became modernist. We stopped because it kind of sucks and it's a really inefficient way to spend your time. If that is your hobby, that's awesome, but we should call it a hobby and we shouldn't pretend that this is actually how you support a family, because it's a little ridiculous.
Yeah, and even people that have scaled up, like, kind of direct beef to consumer, projects or something like that, or that are really feeding themselves, it is just way more complicated, and you cannot do it in 1950s garb and suspenders and stuff like that. Like, it's just going to be a lot of work. What you said about going back to the past and sort of feminism, trad, and red pill, kind of idealizing different eras. I think about there's a band called The Head and the Heart, which may not have ever hit with the Gen Zers, but there's a line in one of their songs that says, "I wish I was a slave to an age-old trade, like riding the rails and working long days." No, you don't. You do not wish you were laying railroad across Nebraska.
It's so hipster.
Oh, well, my part of my dad's family came from the Isle of Man, 1900-ish, to build railroad in Illinois. Sweet. And the only way that you would leave one continent and go to the other one for a terrible job is because you were so dang poor and desperate where you lived. It's a small island between England and Ireland, by the way. And the fact that we're idealizing, my grandpa built highway during the Depression because it was like a works progress administration, Roosevelt era to create jobs. And because there was such demand, you could only work the morning or the afternoon. Okay. And you were laying asphalt. And it was, if you've passed out from dehydration, they just drug you to the side of the road and gave your job to somebody else. And so this idea that because feminism, because red pill, because, trad movement, that we think we're going to go back to that. Your ancestors fought tooth and nail to escape the life that you don't understand, and you would be so miserable in. I'm just a big fan of like living in the world we actually live in. And it's funny because maybe the trad people would be like, well, my wife stays home and she's a working artist, so she, she has she does work that doesn't require you to clock in, right? And I guess kind of we're more set up like some of the trads, think they are, but like sorry, but I actually like money and I like not being poor. And there's a Twitter account called Rachel for Patriarchy that's been on Tucker Carlson a lot, which yeah. And so she and I got into it a bit, and she couldn't even understand the argument enough to like refute it, that she just said, well, you have to choose between making money and, being with your family. You can only have one. I was like, no, there's a lot of high-end skill sets where you can make $400 or $500 an hour if you're solving a high-end problem. And then you're making $250,000 a year working like 18 hours a week. And she's like, well, no, but you have to pick one. Yes, if you're not good at anything and you're working for the lowest wage possible, you do have to pick one between working 2 full-time jobs and being with your kids. If you can get good at something.
That's also just like such an example of conservatives not being able to sell a vision. One of my biggest beefs is that, and you see these reactions to, there will invariably every 4 months be a Gen Z woman live streaming herself crying about how hard working is. And the reactions to it are suck it up, buttercup, life sucks, and then you die. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Sometimes the women in question absolutely have distorted perceptions about how the working world should work. Sometimes that's true. At the same time, if what we are telling young women is, okay, stick with us and your life sucks, what kind of vision is that really offering? And I think to your point, okay, you either get to make money or you get to spend time with your kids. Wait, why is that the ideal that we're promoting? Why is that what we're selling as our vision for families? It's also just patently false. Alex Clark interviewed Nancy Pearcey, who's one of my all-time favorite authors. Her work is fantastic, and Pearcey makes a very good point about the fact that a lot of what we think of as trad is not trad enough, actually. And this idea that men go to work and come home and never see their children or participate in family life is quite a new invention, and it's pretty much post-industrial revolution. It's basically when work finally was exclusively out of the home. And I think that since a lot of these trads want to return to the 1950s, they kind of miss the fact that involved fatherhood doesn't just mean that dad is a paycheck and he sends it home to the home front to the wife and kids. Now, I do totally believe that most children do best with their mother at home. I think most children do best when they're not being sent off to daycare. At the same time, one, we have to be realistic with a lot of families, and that's going to look different for every single family, especially in this economy. And two, this idea that women have never worked or never had an identity outside the home is totally ridiculous and just not, it's ahistorical. Women have always been, going to market and going into town, and like the idea that you were dealing with the household may have been true, but that doesn't mean that you were exclusively at home. Civic society, being involved in your church, being involved in the town square was absolutely women's work. And I think that some of this like borderlines fetishistic content by saying, okay, the husband is allowed outside and me, no, I'm barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. Like, it's funny until it's not, because there's a lot of women that really, really buy into this and are deeply unhappy because we're selling a vision that I think in large part, if you're telling fathers that they have to choose between seeing their children or supporting their families, and if you're telling women that they have to choose between, graduating high school and having a husband and kids, you are selling a really, really miserable life to people, and you're not going to get votes. You're not ultimately going to get people, well-adjusted people, to follow you, and you're not going to actually achieve it anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's when I look at these kind of three movements around gender and organizing society, I kind of look at it the same way as you look at like Nazis and communists. They claim to be very different ideologies, but they just wind up creating hell on earth and millions of dead people. Like pick your poison, but whatever stupid thing that you're into of those three that denies reality, it just causes pain and societal dysfunction because it can't actually, because it's not real. And what's sad is that I think that people, and this may transition a bit into some of the influencer stuff we're talking about, people, once they've made it their whole personality, they can't just say it's, and they've built like millions of followers around it, or even 100,000 followers or something. They can't just say, you know what, this isn't real. I'm sort of trapped in this thing where I was pretending to be
break the fourth wall.
Yeah, they can't just say, I got a trust fund, or I am like a red pillar, and sure, I've gotten one night stands with the most unattractive STD-ridden barflies out there. But now I'm 42, I have no kids, and everybody thinks I'm a loser. They can't just say that. They're like, no, I'm going to double down on I'm more red pill than I was before. And it's like, well, you're just more miserable, but you would rather save reputation than like save your own dang life and make it meaningful.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that there are arguments for influencer content that is aspirational. Certainly, like I know there's been this huge push, especially with body positivity and things, to okay, we need real women on the cover of magazines. As a self-proclaimed real woman, I want to see really beautiful models. I want to see models that are hotter than I am on the covers of magazines because it makes me like those products. It makes me like those things. I think influencers are the same way. The problem is these influencers are not just saying, look how pretty I am in my kitchen. Look at this great recipe. Hey, do you want to buy an $80 sourdough starter? They're saying this is how you should structure your family and your life. And it's a much more insidious message when it's something red pill related and it's telling men to get freaking vasectomies, or it's super trad related and it's telling a woman that if he's, and I've genuinely seen this, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic, if he's beating you, like maybe take a look at yourself. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. That is so much more than just, okay, is that swimsuit model, face tuned, or did she shrink her waist on Instagram? The fact that these get to really the core of who we are with our religion and philosophy and, family life makes them much more significant as, fake aspirational lifestyles than just bikini pics or your average influencer who makes it look like she's traveling every week.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good way when you kind of compare it to religion. Maybe a better way to kind of view all this stuff is cults, because the cult tells you that reality is fundamentally broken and that you didn't get it before, and you need to disassociate with everybody that doesn't do it just like you do it. And if you ever have like one ideological toe out of line, you're out.
Yeah. Which I think people, I've seen people say like, oh, there's a lot of cancel culture. And I don't think cancel culture is a great analogy a lot of times. I do think that it's more like cults. And it's, you're not really trad if you don't have 10 kids, fill in the blank here, whatever. A lot of people have brought race into it. Like, you're not really trad if you're not white. And it's like, lots to unpack there. But
that's pretty disgusting.
I don't know. I guess it's really disgusting. I guess they didn't have other races back in the 50s. I don't know. Or maybe that's what people are actually idealizing about these past generations, which is even more disgusting, honestly. But I don't know. Yeah, it is a purity test of sorts. And it's a lot of virtue signaling. It's a lot of what we see done on the left. It's a lot of what we see done in like super social justice movements. Is a lot of the posting has nothing to do with you just organically posting about your life. It's, here are my chickens because someone said I should have chickens. Here's my cow because someone said I should have a cow. This cow is deeply diseased and not doing well and has serious bloat because I didn't know that they couldn't eat all forms of grass. I mean, yeah. I don't know. I think that a lot of it is just signaling that you're part of the in crowd, while not actually having anything to do with being based on, natural rights or natural goods and true values.
Yeah, no, I would say that this, kind of the big figures in this, in particular, the Tate brothers, are self-proclaimed priests of a cult. If you're not familiar with them, they're like half British, half American. Andrew Tate's a former kickboxer, I guess, and has been basically everything that you could possibly do to get him attention. So first he was like this radical atheist, and he just would post next to his like Ferrari about how stupid it was for people to believe in God. And then he decided to become like an Orthodox convert, and then he got bored by that because people quit paying attention to that. He became Muslim while teaching all this like pickup artist stuff. Has been arrested and I believe extradited back to England from like Romania over basically pimping, forcing women into prostitution, and could be looking at prison time. And his fans are like, oh well, it is this cabal of super rich people, but with how low class these people are, by super rich people they probably just mean Jews, because that's what they blame everything on. And the Matrix is out to get him, or it's like the feminists and the government in England. It's like, or the simplest answer is somebody that's
He's a criminal.
somebody that's selling courses on how to like coerce women into being OnlyFans models when they don't want to be, probably is pretty rapey and probably deserves to be in prison. Like, that is the most simple answer, as opposed to like you have to like 4D underwater chess. Well, there's like this secret society that's running both the governments of England and Romania. It's like that gets a lot harder to believe in the era of social media, when you could just record something with your phone and be like, look, I snuck into the secret society. Here they are planning the fate of Europe. I mean, secrets get harder and harder to keep. Like 12 people
they
couldn't
absolutely
keep Watergate
do.
secret. And that was 12 people.
I was going to say, the government can't handle the standard rollout of most services. I don't know if anyone has seen the potholes in their town, but if the government can't fix potholes, I don't really think that they've organized a giant cabal to, take down Andrew Tate. And if they had, they probably wouldn't have taken this long. He just would have mysteriously committed suicide in his jail cell or something. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's funny because they'll build up the Tate brothers as, okay, they're super alpha males and they can do anything they set their minds to. And it's like, these guys are like selling online courses, and they're really just posturing and trying to look richer than they actually are. But I think it's one thing to criticize the Tate brothers, which I'm here to do all day. But I think more than that, they're a symptom of the fact that a lot of young men are really seeking and lacking any sort of vision of what it looks like to be a man.
Yeah.
I think that we've had this war on masculinity for a while that has said, okay, you're supposed to look like women, you're supposed to act like women, you're supposed to mature the same way that women do. And what happens when you tell men that everything that they stand for and everything that they represent is wrong is that you tear down any wholesome male examples, and then you kind of get these like cancerous cell mutations of it, which is what I would consider folks like the Tate brothers to be. And it ends up being yet another reactionary sort of figure. But I know a lot of the young men that are following these guys don't have real male role models in their lives. And so they're more than happy to accept male role models that are telling them, one, that they're victims and that, all they have to do is punch a hoe or whatever to get back at the Longhouse or the women that have kept them down. It's very, very similar to a lot of the toxic
thing. I guess I'm not following. I
haven't seen the Longhouse. It's basically like if a man is longhoused, it's like, okay, women have gotten a hold of him. It's just like women will be called foot soldiers for the patriarchy. The Longhouse is just, the matriarchy, effectively. Women shushing and taking out masculinity. It's the idea that women run everything. Which I think is hilarious when a guy friend tells me that he can't come to something because he has to hang out with his girlfriend. That is a hilarious use of, oh, you're so longhoused, it's like you're whipped. But if you're using it unironically, you have issues. But I don't know. I mean, I don't think that there's any surprise that Andrew Tate has gotten really, really popular exactly during the time that a lot of young men don't have involved like masculine fathers in their lives to look to. I don't know any truly masculine guys who have male role models, whether those are coaches or spiritual leaders or fathers in their lives. I don't know any guy that is secure in his like masculine network that follows these guys. They are basically they're a pacifier.
They're incels.
And it's pretty sad.
They're for like 27 to 47-year-old guys that like live at home. And they've got.
There's a lot of young kids following him now.
Oh yeah, I've heard that like a lot of high school kids are like quoting the Tates and that type of thing.
In their yearbook quotes.
In their yearbook quotes?
Like that's over before it's even begun. These aren't guys that are, disgruntled with the fact that they didn't get a job or they didn't, get a girlfriend in college. They're literally being sold this from very young ages. I've heard this from elementary school and middle school teachers, saying that their boys are idolizing Andrew Tate. So I don't know. I think it's, don't get me wrong, I'm anti-incel. I think that movement is quite silly. But I do feel for a lot of these guys that are like truly struggling. And I don't know. I think we can, not take them super seriously individually, but we should take it seriously as far as like something's not okay with our men.
Yeah. Well, my wife and I just took our 5-year-old who's pre-K we've looked at a couple different kindergartens in the last couple weeks, and so that's kind of my first time to get reintroduced to like elementary/middle school culture, because most of my friends' kids are kind of equally young, or some of them like had kids really young and they're in high school or something by now, right? But I don't have a view into this world. Like, you forget how like much its own little world is, like elementary and middle school, when you haven't been there in a long time. Like, it has its own slang, it has stuff kids are into that, like I mean, I feel like Boomer and Gen X parents didn't pay that much attention to what their kids were watching or listening to or whatever, right? And so, you know, it's like you would be into shows your parents weren't paying any attention to or anything like that. And I assume it's the same thing now, where it's like, you know, kids grab their parents' phone and watch whatever YouTuber they're into, and the parents don't ever pay attention to it. And how many of them don't realize that like they're just binging Andrew Tate here and trying to like form their lives after him? Dang.
I think a lot of them are, and I think that it's probably the Venn diagram between the kids who have unfettered internet access and the Venn diagram of kids who don't have involved parents to be checking on it. It's probably almost a circle. A lot of kids have phones really early, and not just because their parents are irresponsible. A lot of parents, you know, are trying to do the right thing by giving their kids internet access, and they don't really know what's out there or like how much kids can really get into. But I would imagine that the ones that are binging Andrew Tate probably don't have dad going, "Hey, let's go play catch in the yard." That probably is their dad.
Or they're just checked out. Like, there was an article in, I don't know if it's like New York Post or The Guardian or something like that, where this dad was like, well, it's unrealistic that, you know, the show Bluey is like ruining parenthood because these kids expect you to play with them all the time. Yeah, for a very short window. And then they turn 10 and they've got their own friends, you know? Like, because I mean, my days are long.
Man, if Bluey is the problem, jeez.
Well, he's like, I don't, you know, I got to I throw my kid on the iPad while I clean the house. And I'm like, well, sorry, you're a low capacity loser. Like, your kid's going to grow up to resent you. You could just try a little bit harder. That's just you not putting in the effort to do basic planning around parenthood.
Every single day I get more and more grateful for like how involved my dad was. I mean, he started working from home, like pretty proactively asked to work from home, asked his company probably when I was like 4, which did not mean that he was always available to play with us or anything, but it did mean that, you know, if I was ever home from school sick or something, it's like, okay, well, dad's still here. I can't goof off. And I don't know. I mean, just the idea that spending time with your kids, it is that taxing, is a little crazy. And, you know, to his credit, I don't think that they always have to be doing like wholesome enrichment activities. I mean, gosh, my dad would sometimes have us like organize the receipts for his taxes in chronological order. And I was like, cool, I'm working with dad. Like, I mean, and he's going, okay, honey. And, you know, you're having that awkward exchange of, Dad, is this what a speeding ticket looks like? And he's like, oh, shoot, that shouldn't be in there. But that was the first time I found out my dad wasn't perfect. He had a speeding ticket. But no, I mean, I think that we've kind of raised the bar for like, okay, you don't necessarily have to be playing a planned out strategic game that you bought from some Montessori kit with your kid. Just do the stuff you already want to do. For my dad, that was hiking and skiing and kayaking and whatnot. And just bring your kid to do it because they think you're cool. So they're going to think whatever that is cool. Like watch sports with them, explain how football works or whatever. I don't know, but you do have to like your kids, which it sounds like for some people is kind of a non-starter, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's funny how many compliments I get. Like my wife was sick on Sunday. I took the kids to church, and then we went by Home Depot on the way home because I just needed a wrench. And the cashier was like, I just love to see dad spending their time like with their kids. Like, you just don't see that enough. And I was like, I threw him in the cart and came in and bought something. Like, it's just sad that's.
Thank you for babysitting, and you're like, they're my children. I'm not babysitting.
It's like that's such a low bar that like really you don't see that enough in society. That like, man, that just got really sad. And it you know,
yeah,
it's funny because for all the aspirational influencer stuff, the reason kids are getting sucked into Andrew Tate as their hero or whatever is because adults are sucked into escaping their own life, and then they don't. It's like the more content you consume, it seems like the less you're able to actually try. It's like you get pacified, like you feel like you accomplished something by, scrolling YouTube a bunch. And it's like, well, you didn't actually create anything. You're like, well, I feel smarter. It's like, well, you didn't like wrestle.
You consumed,
with a deep
you didn't create.
You just consumed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it seems like that probably is the common denominator as we sort of, like, I know you got to go back to work. So the common denominator as we sort of land here is like, if you're, you get sucked into being red pill or trad or, anti-patriarchy, feminist or whatever, because you're not actually focusing on your own life. Because if you didn't have this, blob of a thing out there to blame, you would have to look at the fact that, like, your own money isn't in order. You are addicted to caffeine or cannabis or whatever it is that's, running your life. Like you are not a well-rounded person. You haven't read a book since college. By the way, like 20% of people never read a book after graduating. 20% of college graduates never finish another book.
I saw that. That is insane.
That should mess with you.
Absolutely insane.
And so,
well, and it's like,
yeah, it's just easier to have the junk food of, Tate videos or whatever. So go with what you're going to say there, though.
I was just going to say it's, I think a lot of the consuming rather than creating thing is it's very easy to figure out what you're against, but then you ask people what they stand for. And a lot of them, you'll get super vague. Oh, family values. Okay. What specifically? Like what do you want to promote? Or are you just, a lot of the culture warrior stuff is just, I'm anti this, I'm anti that. Like promote something, create something, add to the world, and realize that your creations are imperfect and that's part of the human experience and it's awesome. But I totally agree.
Yeah. Let's just kind of last question, rapid fire around here. So you're Gen Z. What do all your friends think about this? Like, I mean, you also maybe have kind of a more elite set of friends, I guess, because you went to the Ivies and you're in DC and that type of thing. But do most of them consider themselves, trad or red pill or feminist, or do they just feel like they're is this more of an online?
Yeah, I mean, most of my friends are specifically Christian conservatives. I mean, most of them through, church and sort of related things. So it's certainly, I don't even know if it would really be the Ivy bubble, although probably a lot of them, I guess, now that I think about it. I think a lot of them kind of find it funny. It's a little bit of a meme, and I think that a lot of them recognize that there's a kernel of truth as far as, okay, this is pointing at a real problem. I think most of us do identify that there is a problem with modernism, and it does seem like we are pretty much divorced from ethics as we used to know it. But I don't know anyone that actually would consider themselves red pill or identify with that. And to the extent that they would consider themselves trad, they more mean that as far as Latin mass and not really like trad influencers. Everybody needs their 4 acres and a couple goats. So I think most people don't take it seriously or just see it as a symptom of a problem, which I think is probably the correct way to engage with it. But again, this is a group of people who pretty universally go to church, work out, eat healthy. Maybe they drink. Maybe that's not healthy. But there's certainly a lot of Zen in my circles, things like that. But
I almost tried, I'm not gonna lie. I've never been a tobacco user, but I was driving and I was like super tired and I bowled my kids in the car and I just about went with it, because if you're not familiar, Zen is like smokeless tobacco, to where you don't have to like spit and be gross, right? You just sort of like get tobacco.
It's just, I think it's like just nicotine. Yeah, it's I will admit that I tried it, and if you have not tried tobacco before, I would say don't do that as your first thing. But I could also just be a wimp. But
I'm the occasional.
That's all I'll say about that.
I've never had a cigarette. Did you like throw up or anything, or?
Yeah, I did not feel well. I did not feel well at all. A guy friend had, I asked for it. He didn't push it on me or anything. I was like, oh, can I try one of those? I see everybody doing it. I was like, I don't know. And I don't really, smoke much or anything like that. So I saw everybody talking about it. I was like, oh, I'm so curious. And I'm definitely the type, like, I'm a very curious person. I always want to like scratch that itch. And he tells me, he's like, I don't think you're going to like it. Oh my goodness. I don't know if I've ever been that sick before. Felt totally fine the next day. It wasn't anything like that. But wow, I felt really, really ill. So I would not recommend it for driving. But I'm not saying don't try it. I genuinely know a lot of people who like it. But whew, I'm not built that way, I guess.
Where and then just to your, because I can speak as an elder millennial, because I'm gonna be 42 this year, and I've kind of seen where like millennials were not progressing, like a lot of maybe more my peers than my friends, right? But it's like, okay, so I now see that there's a certain subset of people I know that will almost certainly never have kids. I mean, we're all early 40s now, and probably will never marry. And many of them will never, people I know that will never really have a career. And it's like just this whole, maybe 10% of the people I know in my generation don't own a home, like never hit any of the markers of adulthood. And it's not like you have to do all those things, okay? Not every person will marry.
But
not every person will buy a home. Not every person will have kids. Not every person will have some sort of career or even like union job or something like that. But when you're hitting none of them and you're like halfway through your time you get here, it does seem, I don't know what's going to happen to those people. Like I think they're going to be very lonely over the next decade. Does it feel like Gen Z is doing better than that? Like, does it feel like people are
I
actually
think they're
like
doing a
meeting in
little
real
better.
life and dating and like doing stuff?
The dating part, probably not. I think socially and certainly as far as romantic relationships go, I don't necessarily see Gen Z as doing better on those regards. I do think that as far as like general self-efficacy, a lot of Gen Zers find millennials a little cringy. No offense. It's just, oh, your Hogwarts house says that you can't buy a house this year. Like, wow, okay, sad, like a little pathetic. For as much hate as young people get in the workplace, like I think in general, Gen Z's super competent in the workplace, and we're our own advocates. A lot of us learn that sort of stuff on social media. I don't know. I think that we tend to have, it's like that post-ironic confidence, right? Like I think that a lot of younger people they don't take it as seriously, which almost helps them be a little bit more aggressive career-wise. Certainly, I think that they're going for promotions and they're like, I can do this. I don't think that translates socially, and so I think we'll probably see fairly similar trends as far as, I don't know, like certainly kids, probably marriage. But I don't know. I think certainly professionally and as far as personal finance, Gen Z are a little bit more go-getters, and they're not quite as wallowing in their own self-pity as our elders.
Well, there's very serious, like Elon Musk has talked quite a bit about like the kind of the depopulation trend and how that's very threatening to a society, because you need young people, partially because we're the United States and we're way over leveraged on Social Security. So the young people are paying for the older people to survive right now. But also, like, just there's so much of the economy that is tied to people hitting markers of adulthood. So, when you get married, there's a whole bunch of money spent. When you have a baby, there's a whole bunch of money spent, right? Both on like events, but also on you having to change your lifestyle. You're like, oh, we have more kids, we need a bigger car. You go purchase something.
Yep.
And when those things aren't happening, it's like you as an adult, maybe that's what you wanted. You worked out better. You'd rather stay single and, never marry, never have kids, whatever it is. I'm not here to like, be the judge of every single person's individual choices. But when it's not happening at scale, it's going to have very serious effects, if nothing else, economically. And I don't think we solved for that yet.
Yeah. No, I would definitely agree. It's a huge issue.
There's getting to be like elementary schools are closing because people aren't having kids. So that changes neighborhoods.
I didn't even think about that.
Big empty buildings, because what are you going to resell an elementary school for? Like, what else are you going to do with it? You can't make it a warehouse. Point. You can't make it a mall. You can't make it an office. It's pretty worthless. And so we're hitting those societal changes. And I was hoping that Gen Z is actually more politically conservative than their parents, which is the first time that's happened before.
Yeah.
But they seem to be having a really hard time relationship-wise. And I was hoping you were going to tell me it's better than that, but no.
I wish I had better news from the home front. I definitely think it's, we're still sort of young. I mean, throughout our 20s certainly, but there's still hope, and I certainly think that a lot of certainly young Gen Z, older Gen Alpha. You're seeing a lot of pushback, especially against like the social progressivism, which I think is important for that sort of family building community. But I don't know. I think as far as markers of, settling down a meeting and whatnot, I don't think Gen Z's quite there yet, but I'm optimistic. I'm certainly more optimistic than I am for millennials. A lot of the ones I see on Facebook are in, I don't want to say rough shape, but like, man, the world is against me and it's so over. It's pretty pervasive from what I can tell.
Yeah. Um, well, a lot of the people I've seen in their 30s and 40s that are like very angry, people I know, and just like your kind of like green and
Yeah.
blue and pink haired Twitter influencer people, that are so mad, like, oh, there's no women, there's no men. It's like, well, I don't even want to be around you as
There's
a
both
peer
of you.
because you're cranky.
Yeah.
Like, you're a weird person. It's not that you just can't find anybody to date. People don't want to hang out with you in general, which is why you can't find anybody to date. And that
Yeah.
that is a thing. What's different about you that you wish you could transfer to maybe generationally? Because you said you didn't mean to fall head over heels from a guy from Ohio or a libertarian, and you got both of them. How did you wind up in? You're moving on. You're actually moving to be closer to your boyfriend is kind of closer to family and that type of thing. So you're moving states. Um, what made you different, or do you see something you wish you could value, an idea, a methodology, I guess, for adulthood that you wish you could transfer to more Gen Zers to see them move forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty boring, but like, just go to church. Like, I was very fortunate to be raised in a super strong church that it wasn't just a Sunday thing. I mean, we were there fairly regularly. They were involved in our lives. It wasn't like a show up and high five your fellow congregants and leave.
Yeah.
I think, and the research certainly supports this, that it's not even just your friends. It's even second and third order relationships affect how you live your life. And I think the more that you can embed yourself in like a truly well-centered faith community, that's going to follow you no matter where you go. Certainly I was a little lapsed during part of college, and then I moved abroad briefly, and remember talking to someone, and she was like, well, why do you believe XYZ? And I couldn't come up with anything that wasn't just, oh, I guess that is Christian faith. I guess that isn't, just general democracy or liberalism or whatever buzzword I would have added to it as an undergraduate poli-sci major type person.
Yeah.
So I think just faith communities, I think that's what keeps you on track as a young adult. I think that's certainly what helps you keep things in perspective romantically, and just keeping your priorities aligned so that there's more to life than just maxing out your social media accounts and whatnot. And I think certainly we have a lot of mental health issues. I think that's a lot of what's really tanking millennials' progress in their lives. And, I have my beliefs about when and whether therapists are particularly effective, but I do think that there's a great deal of evidence for having a solid faith life, just being a total X factor as far as whether
Yeah.
you're mentally, socially, and relationally stable.
Well, I remember being, I had quite a bit of success in my like early to mid 20s, kind of like you're experiencing now. By the time I was 21 years old, I was on TV nationwide. I was on radio in Chicago. I
Cool.
was interviewing A-list celebrities. Like, I had this kind of rocket to the top. And then, as is prone to happen in entertainment, like I just didn't become the next Carson Daly or whatever, right? And
Yeah.
it just kind of started to slide down from there. And I felt trapped because I didn't feel like I had another skill set. And kind of had a lot of things to work through before I kind of had a relationship that could work. So basically, I was in my like late 20s, and like I saw a therapist, went on an antidepressant and that type of thing for a minute, which neither one of those really did anything for me at that time in my life. Not saying never, but just
Yeah.
didn't do anything for me. And the reason I was sad is my life was freaking terrible. And a pill or talking to a person for 60 minutes a week that's being paid
Yeah.
to be your friend is not going to fix that. And like, really, I just had to have the backbone to finally just be like, I got fired despite being number one in the ratings for radio. I got fired anyway because they said like soccer moms weren't finding me relatable enough or something. I'm like, well, that's also who's listening to me. And then I
Yeah.
just decided I wasn't going back into media, and I pinged around, tech startups and teaching college and everything else, but it at least forced me to like move somewhere and not just be stuck doing the same thing and the thing I hated. And it took me 3 or 4 years to rebuild my life. And then my wife met and I like kind of got into a new career track and that type of thing. But, I think that's what happened to millennials is like we just kept telling them they were sad because of mental health. And it's like, you're probably sad because you don't have any purpose.
Yeah.
You get purpose. Like you'll stop watching Friends for the 37 millionth time. Go do something. Like you're sad because your life doesn't matter beyond you and you're super isolated.
Yeah.
Go do something.
And so, weirdly, having a spouse or child is a good fix for that too.
Yeah, I can't sit around and have an existential crisis when my toddler's teething and I'm up from 3 to 4 a.m. and then I go to bed and I got to get back up at 7 and work. Like that's the day. And it's not.
Yep.
I wouldn't say I'm happy every day, but I would say my life satisfaction around fulfillment and what I'm doing is very high. And sometimes to live a meaningful life, the day itself is going to just suck and be horrible. And I think a lot of millennials, and I hope your generation learns this lesson, a lot of millennials didn't want the short-term pain, and now they're getting past the point where they probably are going to be able to figure out the necessary skills to like marry, have a career, maybe have a kid at the tail end of when that's possible. And so that just gets us back to the beginning of the conversation. So it's just easier to be red pill or feminist and blame society for maybe the skills you didn't even know you missed. That is a sad way to end. Can you make it happy before we quit?
Go to church, find purpose, get married, have babies. That's more positive. There's good in the world.
Allie Cluffalo, who kind of became our resident Gen Z correspondent. Good look on the move this weekend. We'll do it again if you're cool with that. And then I think either your boyfriend or somebody from your boyfriend's company is coming on, right? At some point.
Yes. Hopefully. He'll be able to after the move. Once we have Wi-Fi set up.
Okay. Yeah, you were a little sketchy today. You got like Super Mario 1 pixelated for a minute.
Oh, weird. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay. You can talk to me from Ohio next time, and there'll be less demand.
Yeah, maybe Ohio has better Wi-Fi than Indiana.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
Cool. This is the Idea Podcast. Thanks for hanging out. And
thanks so much for having me.